Greetings, Disney adults, Disney fans of all ages, welcome. Recently, my family and I enjoyed our annual vacation to Walt Disney World. We go every year over Thanksgiving break. Of course, it was a wonderful, delightful trip. We had a fantastic time. And something that occurred to me on this trip and inspired me to do this video were characters. More to the point, a lot of character interactions. If you've ever been to Disney World or Disneyland, you know what a key part that the characters play in your Disney vacation, especially if you have little children. But I dare say, even Disney adults love meeting Disney characters. And so I said, what a good idea for my show. So on this episode, we're going to talk about what would Walt think of the characters at Disney World? What would Walt think of character interactions and how all of that works together? Now, before we get into discussing any of that, as you know on this channel, we've got to take a little trip. So before we talk about what would Walt think of the characters now, let's take a quick little trip and go back in time.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
How do you do, everyone? This is Hank Weaver. For the past year, this signature has announced the opening of Disneyland, the show. Now, it announces the opening of Disneyland, the place. The people and eyes around the world are focused on these 160 acres here in Anaheim, California.
This is a real cavalcade of Disneyland characters.
Here comes the Disneyland band.
Yeah, directed by V.C. Walker and Tommy Walker. And there's Mickey and Minnie Mouse and all of the gang cavorting up and down the street.
Peter Pan.
Dumbo and Pluto and Donald Duck and all the other characters are from the Walt Disney costumes created by for John Harris's Ice Capades, which is on tour with Peter Pan right now around the United States.
And I think I can see coming now two of the most important people here at Fantasyland. The real star of it is Mickey and Minnie Mouse. And they're on their way, ladies and gentlemen. I can see them coming. There they go. And they're going into the Mickey Mouse Theater, a beautiful movie house which will have a continuous performance for children who visit Fantasyland.
When Disneyland Park opened in 1955, we saw some costume characters who were a part of the overall festivities. Mickey was there, Minnie was there, Donald Duck was there. I think a couple of other characters were there as well. This is actually not the first time that we saw Disney costumed characters. Probably the first time we ever saw those characters was at a show in 1931 by Fanchon and Marco called Mickey Mouse Idea, and it premiered in 1931. Now, we would see Mickey and Minnie show up again a few years later, and in 1937, for the premiere of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Mickey and Minnie were on hand, as well as the Seven Dwarfs. Now, especially for Mickey and Minnie, it was really just a character head, whereas the rest of the person was just, it was obvious it was a real person. They just had a shirt on, a pair of shorts, some leggings, but it was very clear that it was a person just wearing like a costume head. Kind of like several years ago, me at Halloween. Fast forward to 1955 for the opening of Disneyland. And actually, before we get into Disneyland in 1955, we have to go back to 1950. You see, in 1950, the Traveling Ice Capade show teamed up with Disney and said, we want to introduce Disney characters in our Ice Capade show. And Mickey and Minnie were the characters that were introduced in 1950. So now we fast forward to 1955 to the opening of Disneyland. They want Mickey and Minnie roaming around. And it just so happens the Ice Capades have a couple of Mickey and Minnie costumes. And so the Disney company borrowed the Mickey and Minnie costumes from the Ice Capades to use for the grand opening of Disneyland. Now these costumes, remember, were for the Ice Capades. So there was room for a lot of motion, especially in the legs and the feet area. And the head, well, obviously an ice skater has got to be able to see pretty much all the way around them. So the head sort of had this mesh material between Mickey's teeth so that the performer could see. Now remember, these Ice Capades costumes were designed to be seen from a distance, under stage lighting. They were not designed to be seen up close and personal. And so the original intention was that there would not be costume characters roaming the parks of Disneyland. But even those characters, even though they looked a little bit odd, a little bit creepy, if you will, the fact is guests loved them, and guests clamored to get pictures and to try to meet up with Mickey and Minnie. So much so that the Disney company kept bringing those characters out. But after about 4 years, the Disney company said, we're going to take over designing these characters. And a lot of this change was pushed by Walt Disney himself, who said you can go to any theme park for rides and for food and for shows and for attractions, but we're the only ones that have those characters. We need to try to put those characters out there. When the costume department started trying to create characters, among their first directives was to try to take care of the performer inside the suit. So they worked to try to use lighter materials. They weren't always successful, and some of the early costumes were pretty heavy, but that was still the idea. But in the early years, thought was not given to proportions. And so it wasn't unusual in those early years of Disneyland to find Mickey Mouse as over 6 feet tall, or Mickey Mouse might be around 5 feet tall. And it wasn't until a few years later that the Disney company said, okay, we need to standardize this. So pretty much Mickey's always the same height. And sometime in the mid-60s is also when the Disney company came up with their rules of character etiquette. Among these, make sure that we don't have multiple characters in the park. So in other words, you don't want to see 2 Mickeys roaming around the park at the same time. And over time, the Disney company got better and better at creating costumes that you could interact with. For example, the earlier costumes in the 60s, they started working on having the head and the body be a little bit better, but the early versions, often the arms just kind of hung down by the side. So a character could not hug anybody, couldn't shake your hand or high-five you. For a very long time, character interactions were random. If you wanted to see Mickey, you would go to the park and hope that you see Mickey. Could be that you were lucky enough to see several characters, or it could be that you were unlucky enough to not see any characters. And that's just kind of how it was. It was sort of random. Now, when Disney World opened in 1971, by this point, the characters are a regular part of the Disney parks experience. And people want to see the characters. People want to hang out with the characters. People want to get pictures with the characters. Now, Disney World, they follow the exact same idea they had followed in Disneyland, which is just the characters come out at random times. But it was sometime, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. I tried to find out exactly when and really couldn't find the answer to this question. But sometime 80s or 90s, as the parks got more and more popular, it became obvious that they needed a better way to control the crowds that wanted to see a character. So the idea came about to schedule. And they started calling these meet and greets. And there would be certain places in each of the parks where you could actually go and meet a character. Now, you did have to stand in line for it. There was another line you had to stand in, but if you were a big fan of the character, you were willing to do it. You would stand in line so you could get a picture with the character, spend a few moments talking to the character. Overall, it was better for the characters. They didn't have to worry about random people just coming up to them from whatever direction. And guests liked it because children who are sitting there going, we really want to meet Mickey, or even Disney adults who are saying, I want to meet Mickey. And I can tell you this, my wife was thrilled on our past trip to be able to meet Figment at his meet and greet. So yeah, Disney adults love meeting characters as well. But on the other side, there was a period of time in the Disney parks when we didn't have that spontaneity. We lost a little bit of it. And with it, dare I say, a little of the magic. So, what would Walt think? I think overall, Walt would be pleased, and I think he'd be very happy with the fact that the characters still are something as popular as they were then. Remember, it was Walt himself who, after discovering how popular the characters were with the guests, who kind of pushed that the characters be a permanent part of the parks. And I think Walt and the early Imagineers would be very surprised to see how popular the characters are. Adults and children alike wait in line and want to meet the characters. They want autographs, they want pictures. Many adults want to talk to the characters and have a conversation with the characters. And it's really a lot of fun to do. Now again, I kind of think that the scheduled meet and greets took away a little bit of that magic. 2020, of course, everybody knows what happened. The closures of the Disney parks, the COVID-19 pandemic. As we gradually got out of the COVID mindset and the COVID, everything that COVID brought with it, we began to see the characters more and more getting back to what they used to do. But one thing the Disney company did, I imagine because of guest feedback, let's have the characters roam around. To where now, you will see characters just roaming the parks. Now you can still also meet and greet characters, so you can schedule a meet and greet with a character, but you can also just randomly see a character in the parks. What inspired this particular video? My family, on our second day at Disney during our big trip in November, we had gone to Fantasyland. We were eating at Friar's Nook. And while we were eating, I looked over towards the carousel, and there's Anastasia and Drusilla, Cinderella's stepsisters, just walking around, just kind of interacting with guests, walking around the carousel. They even rode the carousel. And I wish so much that I had gotten a picture with them, because that was the Disney magic. We were able to see a couple of the characters and they just popped up. We didn't know they were going to be there. They just randomly showed up. Walt would wholeheartedly approve. I think Walt would really love kind of what we have now. Schedule a meet and greet, so if you really just want to sit down with a character, get their autograph, get a picture, you can do that. But the spontaneity is returned as well, at least to some degree. And it is possible to see a character just wandering the park. I want to close with one last story. We also ate at the Garden Grill one day that we were there. We had breakfast. We did the breakfast interaction, which is a character breakfast. Well, my family and I got there, and of course we're interacting. Well, as we're eating our breakfast, we noticed another family come in and get seated not far from us. And the little girl, about 6 years old, she's wearing a shirt that has Dale on it. Or Chip, I think it was Chip. And they happen to be sitting by the door where the characters are coming out. And they came in while the characters were backstage, but then the characters came out. And when Chip came out, she was going, "Chip! Chip!" And you could just look at her and see how excited she was. Well, unfortunately, Chip and Dale and the characters, of course, have a set way that they're supposed to go that unfortunately took them away from her. And they had to make the whole circuit of the restaurant. But I told my wife, I said, even if we're done, I want to linger because I want to see this girl. And so when Chip finally came back and we were the next to last table before them, Chip finally came back to our table. We'd already gotten pictures with Chip. We'd talked to him already. Chip came up to me and he says, "Hey" again. And I said, "Chip, there's a young lady over there that really wants to meet you." So he immediately went over to her table and started talking to the girl. Then Dale comes over. The look on that little girl's face was priceless. It was wonderful. I almost had tears in my eyes as I walked out. I said, that is Disney magic. The excitement of seeing a beloved character. And that, again, is what I think Walt would be very pleased with. So, do me a favor. Who's your favorite character at Disney World? Do you enjoy going to meet characters when you go to Disney? Let me know in the comments. Do me a favor. Give me a like. Subscribe to my channel. Tell me what you think. And I hope that I see you in the Disney parks very soon. Thank you for watching.